I wanted to start by asking you something that it's more just it was that Byanda Wlaza who is
Yeah.
that very asymmetrical. It looks like he's running in
Hmm.
like a gallop the whole way down the track, and short guy too, like 5'6", and what is that in what is that in actual metrics? Like
Centimeters.
yeah,
Yeah,
165 or
something
170.
like that. We're kind of mixed up over here. We use both, but for height, we're usually on feet and inches. So, I understand 5'6" better than the centimeters.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you what you guys use because we you started the whole English like thing that we are
It's
still
so,
stuck on, and
yeah, it's so mixed up because we'll use one of the most confusing things is we still use miles per hour on the motorways, but we measure everything in centimeters and meters. So it's the same with this. It's especially tough when we're talking track and field because obviously all of it we talk about long jump, high jump, pole vault. We're always talking meters and centimeters. And so when we hear about people have jumped feet and inches in the US, we're always trying to do the conversion. But luckily, you've got ChatGPT now, so you can just throw it in there.
yeah, that's what the kids at the track meets are doing now. Because when I was in track in college 20, 21 years ago, 22,
Mm,
they would always read everything in meters because they're
mm.
trying to be official and normal. And, but then everybody is like, what is that in feet and inches? So I had this whole like conversion in my head for at least high jump. And most of the events I kind of knew, but I feel like now maybe people are just on their phones like asking it instead of kind of I always had to memorize whatever it was.
Yeah, yeah. I've never tried to do it in my head. It's far too complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, what do you think about his form? You had mentioned something to me before about it, some experience
Mm.
you had with that very gallopy type thing. I was curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that came to mind when I saw it was one like videos of Bullet Bob Hayes from back in the
Oh
day.
yeah.
But I had a teammate that did the same behind a sled when he was pushing bobsleighs. But he was a sprinter as well, and he ended up running sub 10. He ran 996 for the 100. So, he's an incredible athlete. But in that case, his coach did pull him further back towards the perfect technical model. So he coached that gallop out as much as he could, and it did augment his performance. He definitely got better. It wasn't the only thing that was improving his
Sure.
performance, but there was definitely a correlation with the gallop impeding some of the push times, and it was a lot more exaggerated when he had a sled in front of him. It was a lot
Mm,
more subtle um, than than when he was sprinting. So when he was sprinting, it was very subtle. With the sled in front of him, it was quite obvious. Um, so yeah, I think it's one of those things. People often ask the question whenever that video gets shared. People are in the comments saying, "Well, what do you do with this? Do you go with it, or do you coach it out?" And for the most part, from what I've seen, moving extremes, but everybody's got a bandwidth from. We have the perfect technical model because it's just something that we can see as it's a benchmark, and the bandwidth comes out from there. People's movement and their differentiations in movements, their different movements. But from what I see, and there might be a little bit of survivorship bias here because almost all speed coaches are going to try and move their athletes back towards that perfect technical model. So who knows? I don't know if we've seen somebody probably since, Bullet Bob Hayes days back then who's just been allowed to continue their whole career without fixing these things. So there might be a little bit of a bias there, the fact that everybody's getting it coached out. But even if you look at kind of 18-year-old, 19-year-old Usain Bolt and his lateral movement. Everyone talks about head over foot and how he gets maybe more lateral movement than others. But if you look at him compared, world record compared to like 18, 19-year-old Bolt, he was still closer at that point to that perfect technical model. So, um, yeah, I think funnily enough, I think everybody would have your very intricate, slight little gallop because we have this strong leg, fast leg thing going on, right? And it's really obvious in Europe where everybody plays football or soccer. For anyone listening in the US, we just kick a ball from as soon as we can pretty much walk. We're kicking a ball, and you very quickly fall into your dominant leg. And so when you're kicking a ball thousands of times in your development, when kids in the UK or in Europe turn up to their first track and field training session when they're kids, it's never hard to know what their dominant leg is for a block start or for a takeoff in the jumps. Because you just ask them what leg they kick the ball with, and it's the opposite leg, it's the planted leg. it's the strength leg, you'd say. And I
Yeah.
know that there's language around up leg, down leg as well. So I think it's a real exaggerated example of that coming into play in somebody's gait. Someone that's just taken that strength leg, speed leg, or up leg, down leg to the absolute extremes.
Yeah. It's interesting with the bobsledder, just because I would think that if you have more grounding, like you're holding on to something, the contact times are longer, that there would be less asymmetry. And then when you get up and run, there would be more. So
Mm,
it's interesting that he was backwards. And that makes sense to me how clearing that up would improve your performance. But
yeah.
it is interesting. You think about that guy. I mean, if you're a shorter athlete, 5'6", and you're running sub 10, which I think it was the late Ralph Mann who had talked about, like, if you're shorter than 5'9", you can't set the world record in the 100. Like, just from whatever, biomechanically speaking. But part of me just wonders with those guys, at least in the top end, and guys who are real extensible like he is, if, maybe that strategy is in the bandwidth that's going to be fine for him. But his acceleration, actually, now that I think about it, I'd like to go back to his acceleration. And I know I did at some point, just to kind of look at that. And with those guys too, I like to look at, well, how does the race unfold? Like, where are they breaking away? Because if he was just blowing everyone's doors off and then going asymmetrical and that last 50 and getting, closed in on, okay, yeah, maybe let's look at fixing this. But as I remember, I think he was basically holding the gap as a shorter athlete, like as a 5'6" guy. And to me, I'm like, okay, if you're holding that gap, maybe there is something about this for your top end. And then I would also go into, like, yeah, that start and how gallopy is the start versus does it actually get more in the top end? Like, he's changing his rhythm to do this. So it's like this. Yeah, I think there's more pieces certainly too in 100 than maybe a bobsled, but that totally makes sense with a bobsled. Like, I've just pushed the prowler sled around,
Yeah.
and I know if I was doing that, I'm sure it wouldn't feel good. I don't know why that guy did that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you start holding on to the sled, and after the first few strides, most of that resistance has left. Like, it's very heavy the first few strides, and then the resistance decreases after that point. And it gives you it gives you freedom that you don't have when you're sprinting, because you are leaning on something. It's like a huge Zimmer frame. A lot of those rotational components, the counterbalance of the arms, the interaction of the oblique slings, the hip oscillation, it changes because you have that crutch, essentially. You have a
Yeah,
crutch with which to explore more extension, more rotation, different movements. And that manifests in some different ways. It can manifest in some interesting injury dynamics as well. But with him, it really exacerbated that gallop early on. But then that was trained out, and things improved. Um, yeah. But I think with Byanda, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops now over time, and what that manifests in time wise over the 100 meters.
yeah. And the question too, like you mentioned, is what do you do with it, right? Like, if somebody does it, do you let him keep? Like, what are the rules to let them keep doing it versus the bobsledder? You mentioned, like, the rules to not,
Mm-hmm.
and and then too, I sometimes I think even about exploring, like, those asymmetries. Like, I like one of the last workouts I did. I've kind of shut down my speed and, like, max jumping stuff for the summer, just because I don't have a track season really. Like, I hope to do some masters tracking soon,
Mm.
but kind of towards that tail end, literally the last workout I did, and it was getting a more exploratory vibe anyways. But I was going really asymmetrical on the Lila calf sleeves. And I think there's
Mm.
different microweights out there too. But Lila, I absolutely love them. And I was doing, a lot of times you do like just low, like pretty light, like 200 grams is pretty substantial on the end of your calf. It adds up pretty quick. And I was strapping the long socks on and putting like 200s on one leg and maybe even an extra 100 on. So like 500 grams on a leg, left leg only run like 120 meters, and then right leg only run 120 meters. And it's just it's crazy because if I'm running like a 7 or 8 out of 10 RPE, yeah, I'll run a certain time on this 120 meters I have. It's in my neighborhood. It's not even a track. It's like the crazy guy running around. calf sleeves on.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is as soon as I go asymmetrical with like a left leg, I will run faster with the same RPE. Like I will run a better time. And then the same thing with the right leg. I'll run a faster time. But
Really?
yeah, and so then the trick is, right, take all the weights off, and then what does the body do? Like what did the system learn from that, and is it possible to run faster? So that's the thing that intrigues me, because you can't tell someone, hey, you see how that guy runs? Go see how Wlaza runs? Go run like that. And then you're gonna have people like pulling hamstrings. That would be funny though if you had a race or you had practice and it was just for fun. Like,
Yeah.
hey, everyone run like this guy.
It reminds me of the three-legged race we used to do at school.
Oh yeah.
Sports day, yeah. Yeah, that was always a lot of fun. And then, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it must be a pretty primal movement as well, because it's like a limp too. If you injure a leg, it's amazing what you can do when you injure a leg. And like, I got run over when I was 9, so I broke my leg really badly when I was 9. And then that left side has never quite worked the same. And it has led to a lot of injury through that side of my body and that leg. But yeah, I've never quite used that leg right. It's a slight limp. It's like almost, if you really slow things down from a rear view angle of me sprinting, I'm almost using it a little bit like a peg leg. So there's it's a very built-in movement pattern as well, I think, just for when we actually injure ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's interesting. And even what you mentioned with the soccer kick and those types of things. And even doing like, the drills where it's hard to describe on video, but it's like, it's the 1, 2, 3 shuffle and fast leg, 1, 2, 3 shuffle and fast leg. Those asymmetrical kind of things, they just feel good. Like once you get it, at least, you have the group of 12-year-olds in it. If you would even do that movement with that group, probably not. Like even like a group of younger athletes that doesn't get it, that they're not going to feel it. But as soon as you start to feel kind of that, it's almost like the momentum of that straight leg, but then the speed of that the swing leg going down. If people are watching the video, they see my finger, my sprint finger puppet. I think there's something that like kind of feeling that interplay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just, maybe most of our cueing kind of tends to disregard that a little bit. And whereas,
yeah, well, I mean, even if you go into, you talk about the argument of A skip versus like dribbles, where with an A skip, you're isolating side to side. With a dribble, it's very much the rhythmical movement and the switching nature, the limb exchange within the air. Whereas you take that out from a traditional A skip when it's 2 foot, 1 foot.
Yeah.
You're actually really isolating side to side. So one of the arguments with traditional A's and B's is that you're isolating one side and you're changing the learning process there, because you're actually taking out a reflexive action, which is the cross extensor reflex that you get in a dribble. So, maybe that improves the skill acquisition within that movement because you're isolating one side.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the stuff that happens in the air is definitely the stuff that can transfer to sprinting. I think that's another thing to look at. Yeah, with the A's and B's is most of the stuff happening on the ground. Like you get that double ground, and now it's a little bit more dance. And the joke is, if you're a track athlete at the dance party and you don't know what to do, you can bust out your A skips, because the double ground is a downbeat. There's a downbeat in dancing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, people talk about that rhythm and good dancers being good athletes and being more fluid. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Athletic performance is built on a spectrum of training methods, from high velocity skills to power training to strength work. And on one end of that spectrum, on that strength end, you have the most targeted work in the form of machines. And this is part of the reason that so many top speed and strength coaches have their favorite machines to deliver that targeted stimulus. For decades, Hammer Strength has been a top provider of reliable, effective machines that are trusted by coaches and athletes worldwide. They fit seamlessly into that total performance program, delivering that targeted strength stimulus. When it comes to your machine-based strength training needs, think Hammer Strength. Weighted vests have been a staple in athletic performance for decades, but the next generation in wearable resistance is found in light micro-loads placed on the limbs of the body. The leader in micro-loading and wearable resistance is Exogen gear by Lila. Exogen is used by the top track and field and sports performance coaches in the world and it provides a level of angular velocity training and potentiation that is second to none. If you want 20% off of Exogen gear by Lila, then head to lilateam.com, that's lilateam.com, and use the code JustFly20. That's JustFly20 for 20% off your order. Grab your Exogen gear today and see the difference in your training. Yeah. So hey, let's get in a little bit of your background. I love that conversation with the asymmetrical man. Those are, I mean, I'm like, shoot, I could just keep going on that, but I'm like, hey, I gotta get a question. I'm sure a lot of people know who you are, Ben, but I wanted to ask. I really just digging into your background. You know, people who are familiar with you, bobsled, but your background, you have a very strong background in track sprints and jumping and plyometrics, obviously, for people who watch your material. But it wouldn't be that straightforward that a bobsledder, someone who's bigger, stronger, more forceful, is a great plyometric athlete. So tell me a little bit about your own background as a track athlete and where you came from there, and then how that folded into bobsled over time.
Yeah, so multi-sport athlete as a kid, just a very hyperactive kid, and loved getting out and doing exercise and burning off energy. So I did every sport that was thrown at me, really. But I mean, my talent was definitely with short sprints and jumps from as long as I can remember. There's definitely a talent there. I can jump and produce force well. So did a lot of track growing up in the summer, a lot of football, soccer in the winter, quite a bit of rugby as well, which I really, really loved. And then went to university to study sports science. And at that point, I'd be starting to compete at a junior level, a national level, basically in the long jump and I'd got 4x100. I competed nationally in the 4x100 as well. But the long jump was my better event. So pursued that in university, and basically one year going into the training center, I actually saw an advertisement for trials for bobsled. And a few people had done similar trials and been funneled into different sports like skeleton and rowing and track cycling, a few different Olympic sports. And I just liked the look of the tests they were doing. They were tests that I was good at. So one thing that I did notice when I went to university and I started training with very good athletes, triple jump European junior champions, like European under 23 champions, international athletes. Although I was nowhere near them on the full event of triple jump, in any test, any 30-meter test, standing long jump, standing jumps, force tests in the gym, I was always ahead of these guys. So there was a disconnect there. So I was willing to explore different avenues and different sports. But I just really liked the look of the test that they were doing, which I believe was a 40-meter sprint, standing broad, squat and bench press back then. And that combine has changed over the years, but I thought I'll give that a go. And I was only 78 kilos at the time, so 172 pounds, and I was 6'1". So I thought, I'm not built for this sport, but it's going to be really good fun to give it a go. And I thought maybe there was a chance I'd get funneled into something else, maybe skeleton, sevens rugby. But my scores were really good on those tests, and so they invited me along to the push track, which is, if anybody's watched Cool Runnings, it's a bit like a little bit more technical push sled that they use to slide down a hill in Jamaica on wheels. And that is on a track it's still in the UK, and there's a certain time that you have to push. And I hit that qualification time, and the rest is history. Put on 10 kilograms of mass in the first 12 months. I've peaked out now at 96 kilos, so 212 pounds. And yeah, I've really found my niche. So it works to my strengths, which was short acceleration, slightly longer ground contacts. And yeah, I had a 10-year career, retired, and have recently come out of retirement to try and have one last dance in Milan early next year.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that as well, because I mean, were you 38 when you came out of retirement for bobsled? And isn't that, I mean, that's like kind of angst. That's like LeBron James level
Mm.
like like longevity there.
Yeah, so I mean, I retired at 35 because I thought you're definitely pushing it now, mate. Like you're getting a bit older. You've been through 3 Olympic cycles now. And yeah, that Olympic medal just always eluded me, and so that it's like a carrot being dangled a little bit, like just the opportunity to try and go after that again. Um, what I did notice was I definitely missed competitive sport when I retired. I think that's the biggest thing that I missed. I missed the camaraderie with the guys,
Yeah.
but also just the competitions, just having something competitive in my life to orientate myself was something that I missed. And I carried on training, carried on making content. And one thing that I noticed that was just my output in basic power activities was not diminishing. It was really staying up like 99 percentile really of what I'd produced in the past with much less training volume. And it got to the point where I said, well, I'm going to throw my hat back in the ring and see what I can do. And output wise, performance wise, it's been very, very good. I've still done very well and I'm still up there. But definitely the resilience piece is more difficult now that I'm a bit older. And I think we talked about this
Yeah.
before. It's you never really know. You always you see the curve with other athletes, and you're led to believe, oh, at this point, you're over the hill. At this point, your performance is going to diminish. But until you get there, you don't really realize why. And it's not the output. I think it's just more the debilitating pains and injuries that really start putting an end to people's careers. So the better you can manage yourself, and I think this is why we're seeing it in professional sport with your LeBrons, your Cristiano Ronaldos. It's just that
Yeah.
much better management from sports medicine, really.
Yeah. It was, I saw something the other day. I need to look into how true this is, but it was something where, and working in masters track, I work with a lot of masters track athletes. And so I'm starting to get more used to the trends of like, okay, as you move from the 40 to 45 to 50 to 55 brackets, what happens to your time? Is there any trends in a more steep drop off? Which obviously once you get to M40 versus the 30s, yes.
Yeah.
But some people say it's really like the mid 40s. And there was this post that's like, you age the most fast. It's like 44 and 65 or something.
I
I'm like,
saw that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw that. It seemed very specific.
Yeah, a little too specific, but I was like, well, I'm 42, so that means I only got 2 years before. But I mean, it is funny because I will say, yeah, like you said, I mean, the thing that's been hardest for me really for the last 15 years has been Achilles management, just kind of being a little bit on the heavy side for someone whose sport or high jump and triple jump is very fast, reactive, and elastic,
Absolutely.
and someone too, I need a lot of longer tempo sprints to honestly just maintain my engine. Like that's
When
something
you,
that's important to me. And although team sport's a better way for me to get it because I get those contacts in a much more diversified format.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
this last year was the healthiest my Achilles have been in a long time. And I think I did a really good job with the way the training year was. People to train with occasionally and just setting things up in a really stimulating manner. And I mean, I jumped higher than I have this year. This year, I jumped higher than really the last 5 years, and eclipsed a lot of stuff I even did at points in my early 30s. Not all in my early 30s, but it is
Yeah.
just a lot of it was just good Achilles. Hey, if my Achilles are good, and I could do whatever plyos I want,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's there. Like it's
Yeah.
there. So it's just it's interesting that relationship, like you mentioned.
Yeah, well, that's been my experience too. Yeah, the Achilles issues are very difficult. One thing that about this pursuit, this coming out of retirement, is luckily the one thing that's been very, very tolerable is pushing sleds. I haven't sprinted like really top end speed in sprint spikes. This whole process, I've worn like middle distance spikes. I'm just trying to offload those Achilles a little bit. It's really interesting, that team sport piece that you talked about. I think when we do throughout our development, if you play multi sports, which most athletes do, or at least used to in our generation,
Yeah, yeah,
you
right.
keep all of those movement options open to you. And then when you do something very linear for so long, you start to miss those other pieces. And this is really, really random, but I was listening to Russell Crowe on a podcast. Sure, it was Russell Crowe, yeah, and he was talking about all of the injuries he had through his career, filming Gladiator, all of the different stunts that he was doing, and his Achilles were apparently terrible. And this is a guy with absolutely no financial constraints. He saw the best PTs
Sure.
and doctors in the world, and he did the usual, the usual approach that science would tell us now with the isometric loading and progressive overload. Nothing seemed to help. And he said that the one thing that cured him was playing tennis. It was just
Yeah.
lateral movement. I
Yes.
thought it was so interesting coming from somebody that doesn't have the, it was weird because it was coming from someone that doesn't have the scientific background, that doesn't have the knowledge that we have around the human body. It was almost even more, it hit home even more that had worked for him because he didn't have the biases around, well, it should have been load, it should have been this, it should have been that. And you mentioned the same thing about, just doing some runs up the
Yep.
creek in like barefoot shoes. You're just allowing the foot and ankle complex to go through those intricate movements. It's keeping a lot of those joints, because it's such a complicated area, so many joints there, they
Mhm.
can get so banged up. It's keeping those joints loose, keeping the movement in there, the fluid dynamics within that joint. And yeah, it's but you just wouldn't be able to prove that really, would you? If you're going to go and study 12
Yeah.
to 24 people with Achilles tendinopathy and then give them different programs, well, how can you quantify running up a creek bed in barefoot shoes? Yeah.
100%. I love that. I've never heard that example with Russell Crowe, but I love those things because it kind of, you mentioned when you and I are growing up, you're multi-sport, you played rugby,
Mm.
and it's one of those things where, like, the idea that we try to control nature, but nature is always in charge at the end of the day. And to me, nature is going out and doing something that's fun, multi-directional, task-oriented. You're getting a dopamine hit. So you're probably any little niggles you might have had anyways, or a sensation of a pain that you would have shut down in a normal training program.
Yeah.
And it was okay. You kept going. But yeah, for me, it's funny with the creek stuff. I find it's a little more time efficient these days. It's just I have another. Basically, I was all into the creek running, and then I had my third child is going to be 2 soon. So it's just like there's so much going on to validate. Driving out there is even sometimes that's hard to validate. So
Yeah.
a lot of it now has been like Polish boxes. Like I have Simply Faster informed me I have the only half dome slanted, or the first. I was the first person to get the new version of it. It was funny. I was going through the online client like onboarding process with someone from
Yeah.
Poland I'm working with, and they had some athletes in their gym. And I see the Polish boxes sitting over there on the side. I was like, oh, that's it, But I guess here in the States where we don't have that stuff so much,
It's the first time I've seen it is in the
yeah,
videos, actually. It's an
yeah.
interesting bit of equipment.
Oh, the half pipe is it,
Mm.
man. And so that's kind of my workaround is like, okay, if I can't go to the creek and run and get the variability with that, just going, all angles, like you
Yeah.
side to side, yeah, but like front to back, kind of like a skier, like a slalom skier. You're just trying to hit it and then the idea too, it's like, well, how can you make it like tennis? Because that's still training. It's like, well, can I make it a game? Can I do it to music? Could I
Yeah.
have someone throw a ball at me while I'm doing this? And just, the more it's kind of like a game, and that's where it's at. And to me, that's just the interesting thing because on the one end, you're so prescriptive, 6 sets of 30 seconds, and then get your max overloads, and this does this to the tendon, this does this. But
Mm.
it's like the joke. It's almost like nature's joke is on the other side. If you just play a game. And not every, like you said, science would study that. And the people who are just so far gone with their Achilles or don't have or they're not good at tennis, or they don't have maybe the sensation to hit the ground certain ways and still have integrity. There's certainly people who are going to play and it's not going to work. But yeah, I'm
Yeah.
rambling, but I love that anecdote. I just think it speaks to so much of that full spectrum of the equation.
Yeah, and I think it's probably there's something around the pain piece there as well. The pain is so complicated, especially
Yeah.
with sometimes the tendon won't really have any pathology, but you're still feeling a lot of pain there. And I've heard it said before, if you give people a warm up and it'd be like back and forth on a court, if you give them a basketball to dribble,
Yeah.
they're going to feel less pain. It is taking your awareness elsewhere. And, modulating the pain is a huge piece within that rehabilitation, because you're not going to compensate as much when you feel less pain. So it's less fuel to that fire.
Mm.
So it's interesting. I think, gamifying is, along with opening up those different movement options, lateral movement, etc., stuff that you've been missing out on in the last 20 years. Most people, the typical is people will do a bit of running, bit of road running, bit of gym. A lot of people stop playing.
Yeah.
Most adults stop playing. They certainly stop sprinting. There's that statistic around how many people actually sprint after leaving high school. And
Yeah.
it's ridiculously low. And there are so many short sprints involved in, even like, so in the UK, the biggest recreational sport people would play would be like five-a-side or a small team soccer, football.
Mm. Yeah.
There's so many short bursts, even 5-10 meters, just short bursts of
Yeah.
at least sprint intent there. That just keeps things ticking over. Yeah, I think everybody going out and trying to run 60-meter repeats probably isn't a great idea, unless you've really been keeping on top of things throughout your 20s. But yeah, I think that's very, very helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
I get asked that by, like, do you ever like jump in a taxi or an Uber and they ask you what you do? And then, like, usually if I'm in training gear, they might be like, "Oh, what do you do? Are you a PT?" And I usually just say, "Yeah, I'm a PT." And they always say, "Oh, give me some advice. Tell me how to get in shape." And they're always like, "Yeah, so I've been talking to my buddy. He's like, he does this split, like chest day, legs and back and biceps." And they're like, "Yeah, should I do CrossFit? Should I do high intensity interval training?" And I always say, "What did you love playing in school?" And they usually say, "Oh, football or basketball." Maybe they might be a little, "I used to play badminton, I'm saying, get back into your sport. First and foremost, get back into your sport, because you're much more likely to go back and do it again. Right? You're always going to have those kind of New Year's resolutions, gym goers that stay for a month. You get back in like a five-a-side football team." And I even get it with clients who I'm coaching online, who are a little bit older, and they want to do some 60 or 100 meters. They want to compete in track, but they're missing they go from a team sport to an individual pursuit, and they're missing the camaraderie of the guys. So I'm like, by all means, still go to like one soccer training session a week, get that in. We can pull one of your like conditioning days out, reduce the volume, the contacts elsewhere. I'd rather you get that day in. If they're not a professional athlete and this is, their hobby, I'd rather you get that day in for yourself with the guys, and a bit of play involved. And I can take something out of the program elsewhere to make sure that you still have that piece.
Yeah. When my children's soccer season just finished up, and they're 7 and 9, but at the end of the season, there's always the parents versus kids game, which is the best, because like you said, there's the parents who played when they were in high school, and they are so into it. Some of the dads are too into it, because like you're playing against 7 and 9-year-olds. So just, let's hold back a little bit, like at the end of one of the games, one of the dads was like, "Oh, we should do this every week." And in my head, it's like, for the sake of injury and running over kids, because no, we shouldn't. But and we always dodge the bullet every time that the parent versus kids is successful. I'm like, all right, this is awesome. But I think the moral of the story is, we don't play enough. Like, we think fitness is just being on the treadmill and looking at a TV or whatever bodybuilding split to look good. But really, the core of it is a community-based play ritual of some sort that everyone's like, everyone can, that ideally the more people that can play, the better too, and that's why they cut multi-age, like even parents versus kids. And once it's like the kids are actual like legit competitors in that, it's even better. And so, I always try to find ways to do that. Like we do in my, up in the formal dining room in my house, we don't have a table in there. We just play like soccer in a room with my kids, and my wife will get involved and the kids play. And that's good Achilles rehab too, actually. What do you said, the small spaces? I think, small space, multidirectional. It's like, that's like the core of so many athletic abilities and I don't think we think about that often.
No, and it's interesting also the way you treat your contacts within that space, because we get, especially when you've been into S&C or producing force for a while, we're trying to get everything we can through extension, rather than just reflexively reacting to the floor in a short amount of space. And you don't want to overextend in that amount of space, because if you're in a room for yourself, like, that's going to shoot you, 1.5, 2 meters laterally each time. Like, it's not needed in that space.
Yeah.
It's the same even with like when you go into and you do rudiment hops with athletes. I think that's another reason that like the rudiment series, the extensive plyo series, that we see a lot of, that, you know, came through the work of Dan Path. That's very successful because it takes people out of trying to maximally jump and maximally extend, especially through the ankles on every contact. It's like the sweet spot there is really, and I know Adarian talks about being squatted during a lot of
Yeah.
contacts. Well, you know, I don't know if that cue necessarily works for the rudiment hops, but if you actually freeze frame people when they're actually going in that amortization phase, they're in a just very slightly squatted position.
Yeah.
But the thing is with those hops, because you're bouncing, you're not trying to finish each contact with extension. You're just bouncing along in that yielding position. Yeah, I think just making sure we stay in touch with that reflexive part of the movement, you know, in the coupling phase, in amortization is key.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned, that rudiment series. And yeah, back when I was coaching at a D3 school in my 20s, my first like a real official track coaching college job, we always did those rudiment series and I always felt like we got a lot out of it. And these days, I actually have kind of, they say like the older you get, you start to shave things out of the program. Like when I was, I did it all the directions, all the everything. And even when I'm sometimes playing around, like sometimes when I throw javelin, to get more in, because it's always like efficiency, I'll do hops to go retrieve the javelin. I'm like, well, I got to do something to get the javelin. So I'll do like just hop in circles or just different places. But usually what it lands with athletes now is I actually only do the backwards and the lateral for the most part. Just because you said like that's what you kind of don't get. So that's the ones that I really try to make sure we get in. Just because everyone hops forward for the most part, and if you're running forward, you're kind of hopping forward in some respects. So that's where that's filled out for me. But I try to sneak in racquetball or tennis. Like, how can we take the oomph of racquetball and tennis and put it into some of these other activities?
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? Because I think especially you make a good point with the backwards and the sideways hops. Those are what you're missing when you stop team sports or stop play.
Yep.
And so it's interesting that there's people get benefits, at least adults, with that rudiment hop series. You know, if I'm getting team players coming in to work with me, I'm less likely to use the rudiment series. I'm like, they've got so many contacts in the craziest positions just 100%. Playing their game. So yeah, that's where that piece isn't quite as important for me. If I'm really trying to dial down their like mechanics and joint mechanics specifically, probably lower limb, then maybe. But for the most part, they've already filled their cup there. We don't need to give them any more extensive work through different planes of motion of the plyometrics.
Yeah, I agree. I think so often, like I'll see videos of team sport athletes doing extensive stuff, and I'm like, we've got to maintain this in season or something. You know, I was like, have you played the sport you're doing this with? Like, I mean, basketball is my big one, and it's soccer, but even like racquetball was my kind of diverse sport. So when I was training my mid-20s coaching, I was still training with the team. I was still doing tempo sprints and all that stuff. And we played in the fall, we play ultimate frisbee as the game, which is not a small side game. That was like long, like I would just be throwing bombs to my sprinters, gamifying their run to get them a lot of times.
Nice.
But then, which was great, but then you can't play that in the winter in Ohio. And so, and by then, like we're in season anyways, so we're not really doing games. Although half my team was playing intramural basketball. This is Division III college. Like I'd go to the YMCA and they got to meet in 2 days, and they're like just like gutting it out for rebounds. I'm like, but then sometimes they do pretty well. Like honestly, if I wouldn't have known that because it's just diverse sport play, you know, and they're already fit. But racquetball was so good as just for me personally, because I'm not playing the games, but I'm still training hard Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or Thursday, Saturday. But Wednesday, I'd play racquetball with my boss for like 45 minutes or an hour, and it was the best. And it made me think about how Booth Dexter talks about, well, your intense days should be intense, and then your off or easy days should be really diverse. And that was like the ultimate, because you think about like the 8-point hops or multilateral. It's like you're never going to really sprint farther than, I don't know, like 4 meters. Someone who plays racquetball is probably going to tell me that I'm probably wrong, but it's not far. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was always really good too.
It's interesting that, talking about the ultimate frisbee, I'm sure I heard Carl Dite say that with his children, like he'll take them out onto a football field and he'll just like throw a football like a little bit further than they can
Yes,
get to
yes,
it and try and push it out each time. And like inadvertently, he's just giving them like max speed training. This is their
yeah,
max speed session, max speed, max velocity. But he's just gamifying it. Kick it a little further, throw it a little further each time. They got to chase after it. And obviously look over the shoulder at it coming
yes,
over, and it just gamifies the pursuit. Yeah,
yeah. That's yeah. I think that's awesome. Even for honestly, even for older athletes, just to do that periodically, so you're not thinking about like it takes you to a different part of your brain. Or like back when I was growing up, I had a dog, and her favorite thing in the world was, excuse me, to chase the frisbee. So I'd just take her out to there's this big church field next to my house, and I would just chuck it as hard as I could. And you just see the dog that jump at the end, flying through the air. Like that dog was getting the ultimate workout. If I could get a human being to do that, to chase a frisbee, sprint hard, 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 and then you don't just get to catch it, you have to like do a flying leap every time. Like it's like there's so many good qualities that come out of that type of idea. But you got to be pretty good at throwing too with the human
yeah.
being versus a dog. The dog by default has to jump at the end every time, and it would get the ultimate workout.
I noticed that with some of this rehab that I did because I ruptured a hamstring 2 years ago now. I wanted to reduce my like max velocity and output in some of the return to sprint stuff, but still get that intent in there really, and some movement options. So I started doing some more curvilinear sprints, which I just haven't done since I played sports when I was a kid. And it was so interesting, even just to deviate, if you think about the lanes on the track, and you've just got to snake around a few
Yeah, yeah,
cones on the line. So you're not going more than a meter really laterally on each curvilinear piece. But it just completely changed the way that I was running. And it was a bit of a shock. I was like, oh wow, this is how I used to run when I was like playing
yes,
soccer as a kid. And it's much more you do spin the wheels like kind of
yeah,
too
yeah,
early. But it's like that if you look at team sport athletes running versus sprinters running, that there's a reason for that. Like you've got to have that access to the ground to make split second decisions. And it was just very interesting how that changed the way that I was moving. And it felt way less impactful. I wasn't worried that I was going to
yeah, yeah.
ping anything, like nothing was going to go. I felt pretty safe, which
Mm.
is very interesting to me. I hadn't had that feeling in sprints really since I was a teenager, just by throwing in that constraint of a very slight curvilinear snake. And I know you've talked about like running across lanes rather than just staying straight and stuff like that within training. It's just very interesting how, from a feedback perspective and a mechanical perspective, it changed how I was moving.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just thinking back to the front of our conversation, like the asymmetry too, because when you're turning left, there's an asymmetry. The right leg is going to be a little bit more straight or supinated. And then when you're going right, the left leg's going to be a little bit more. So you're almost like squeezing in and out of that. But then I had this thought the other day as well. You mentioned you feel safe. And I think there's something to like aliveness when something feels like alive, like you're in it. It's not just, hey, I'm going to go this far and it's in this time, but within that, there's like a task and there's a constant change. It's like, like the Fibonacci equation where it's kind of like it's like 1 + 2 is 3, 2 + 3 is 5. Like it keeps changing. It's alive as it's unfolding. And I was just thinking about this in team sport. You mentioned team sport athletes are spinners. And I was just in a workout I was doing the other day with my training partner. It was a strength day, but I always try to throw like fun stuff in there. So we were doing like just an agility drill where you are backing up and the other person's walking. And then as soon as you turn and sprint, they chase you, and then they try to hit you with a pool noodle. And so we're doing that. And it hit me so strongly that the frequency is insane when you do something like that, if you're used to track or whatever, because every step is its own race.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. Like every step, you have to beat the person to step 2. Oh, okay, beat him to step 2. Now I got to beat him to step 3. And the body's all running this subconsciously. If I just run my, nice 100-meter progression, I'm probably going to get hit on step 2 and then I lost. So it's like each each step being its own race. And it also reminds me of Frank, for instance, talks about in nature, you don't know when you're going to end and the race is going to end or the hunt's going to end. But yeah,
Well,
I
there's
think
chaos involved, isn't there? And that chaos changes, or the possibility of chaos changes the way that we're moving, because we're trying to read the environment around us or react to things around us. And that's what makes track events so very different.
yeah. Yeah. And it's like, how do you then get that like innate, just instinctual piece into something that's longer and more rhythmic? And
Mm.
I mean, it seems like bobsled's a nice intermediate there a little bit. Like you have at least more feedback. And yeah, do you have any thoughts with like how that unfolds in your own acceleration training or bobsled and your track and field experience, like bringing something that's like innate and alive into that rhythm? And I guess bobsled's more explosive. Bobsled strikes you as being a little more punchy. Yeah, tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, the first thing is pushing bobsleds improve my acceleration massively
Mm,
and my top speed, even despite, or maybe because of putting a little bit more mass on. I know
mm,
you've talked about putting a little bit more mass on a narrow ISA can allow them to, I think, pressurize more. And I certainly found that performance augmentation. I was probably just too skinny at 172 pounds,
mm,
basically, even though I was trying to artificially keep my weight down there. But pushing bobsleighs absolutely improved my speed. And you see a lot of track coaches using prowlers now for that kind of acceleration piece as well. There's a disassociation of a body, because like you take that counter movement from the other upper body because you're leaning on something.
mm.
And then also you free up the hips a little bit so you can oscillate the hips a little bit more. And then beyond that, it's purely horizontal with its vector. There's very little of a vertical component in there because you're leaning on something. So that falling force isn't there anymore. So it's quite different from acceleration. But at the same time, I think as far as just a developmental exercise goes, so if we talk about special strength, for
Yeah.
want of a better word, the transferability of that, if you look at some of the like Bondarchuk work or going back to the Zurcher's work, then I think there was that piece there that it was close enough to the activity, but it was overloading it significantly. But I just got performance augmentations from that. As far as it giving me, a little bit more freedom to explore different ranges, maybe, but I didn't see technically much changes in the acceleration away from the sled.
Hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask you with the bobsled because I've never pushed a bobsled, just prowler stuff. But this past July, I was at I think it was the CSCCA Strength and Conditioning Conference, and Tony Villani was there, who owns the Shred Mill, which is kind of like a angled. You have handles on the side, not the front, but as I was working on that, I noticed like one of the things you have to do to be fast on that is you kind of have to pump yourself up and down, like your
Yeah.
torso, your hands pump your torso up and down to basically to find the rhythm of your steps to help them come down faster and with more force. Because if you just keep your torso straight, or just fixed, it doesn't. You really can't do as much. It's like you kind of have to have the da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Is that oscillation there in bobsled, or is that a little bit different?
Yeah, you see it. You do see it a lot, and there's nobody's really refined this to, give you a perfect technical model of what it looks like. But if you see really good bobsleigh pushers, slow-mo at top end, they get this incredible movement around the T-spine and shoulder girdle.
Hmm.
This oscillation that bounces through almost what you see at the hips. It's happening in the T-spine and the shoulder girdle. When you think about it, there's 2 points of contact. There's 2 impulse points. You've got your foot contact, but then there's that pressing into the sled as well. And I think watching it, because you're constantly in pressure with the sled, you think to yourself, that's going to feel like a constant pressure. But once you're out of the acceleration phase, because it's initially flat and then it drops off downhill. So
Oh
you
yeah.
go to an overspeed very, very quickly.
Hmm.
And so it's a little bit like the analogy of spinning a bike wheel. If you turn a bike upside down, obviously the first few spins on the bike wheel, you can grab the wheel and pull it.
Yeah.
And then after that, to make it go quicker, you just got to tap it. It's the same when you're upright pushing a bobsleigh. So when you're off the floor, you're pretty much you don't want to be pulling the sled back. you're pretty much weightless. And then when you impact the floor again, you have got to put that impulse through the sled itself. So it does feel like there's almost a punching going on with your handles. And weirdly, when I was getting to grips with the sport early on, one exercise that I found that had a similar kind of feeling was we used to do multiple split jerks, like 10 or 12 reps with like 40 kilos on the bar. I think they did it a lot in Europe. I think Italy did it a lot in their sprint.
Yeah. I know
So
what
you're most pulsing. So you're doing 2 foot split, 2 foot split, 2 foot split, and you're pressing the bar in a jerk each time. And that's what I felt really transferred. It was actually transferring everything that was going through the floor through to my hands. And so you have those 2 points. It's almost like open chain, closed chain, really, compared to sprinting, because you've got the other point to apply force to. And if you mess up that application from the floor to the sled, then you're just wasting energy.
Yeah, my question is getting that to transfer to unweighted. Like you said, your acceleration got better. I'm sure a lot of it's just probably the majority, I'd imagine, was just getting more powerful.
I think a lot of it was that, to be quite honest. And like, again, going back to special strength, it was the specific hypertrophy as well. Like as a track athlete, had pitiful hamstrings, and I did so much eccentric overload, Nordics, RDLs, everything you can imagine, which just really led to tightness. Just overload. Whereas when I started pushing heavy sleds, I remember I came back off that first bobsleigh season to my like childhood track coach, who took me through to that point. I was with him from like 15 to 25, and he still mentored me beyond that. But he was like, "Oh, well, you finally grew some hamstrings then."
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was it. It was just that 4 or 5 months pushing heavy sleds multiple times a week, which seems so weird to me, because I'm like, oh, we're taking the hamstring out of the equation a little bit here. We're in more of a steeper angle. We're not getting as much of that terminal knee extension in the swing phase. Like, it's not going to be as demanding for the hamstrings, but certainly from a concentric perspective, just a propulsion perspective, absolutely was. And so I think it was more just the specific hypertrophy. So, I mean, it's a lesson in specific strength as well, and transfer.
Heck yeah. That makes perfect sense. Actually, I love that. Because I think, it does make sense, right? We think about hamstrings and top end and Nordics and like just late swing leg. It's like, but that's a very specific and rotational way that the hamstrings get worked. And honestly, I think if it gets pulled off well in good timing, the actual goal is that the hamstring doesn't get overly strained, if that makes sense. I mean, yes, you're going to work it, but I remember I was this is what I do because I don't have time sometimes. My kids are having swim lessons and I'm playing with the baby in the pool while that's happening. And I'm like messing around with some of that Marinovich pool stuff. And I'm and then some B skips in the pool. And it's funny because if you stand in the pool and you just do like an oscillate, you lift your knee out in front of yourself and then you oscillate your hamstring just straight front to back, like that retraction action, I get massive hamstring. Like you feel it in the hamstring. But if you do a B skip, you don't. Because it's almost like it just lengthens and it just times itself out. And yeah, I mean, the muscle's going to work, but it's not very, like, it's almost if it was too muscular, you'd pull your hamstring, if that makes sense. Like if you recruited too much muscle there, you'd probably be on the edge of pulling your hamstring all the time. But so I mean, my thought is just it's more like it's neurological activation, it's integration of the elastic tissues, it's timing, and it is some muscle for sure. But I think being a narrow connection, you're a much more strong and powerful narrow than I am. But it's the same for me. Like all the RDLs, all the Nordics, if I do Nordics, which I'm not bad at Nordics, but I get a lot of it out of my gastrocs and my low back arching.
Yeah.
And if I do RDLs, a lot of it's my low back. And I will feel hamstrings, but I've become of the opinion much more recently of how can I try to get a split squat set up to get my hamstrings? Like that's how I want to get my hamstrings, because that's like running. If I can set up a split squat and feel hamstrings, I'm probably going to feel more when I do my next acceleration. But the ultimate, it's almost like tennis, isn't it? Like, isn't the ultimate something that's alive in a sport itself to do it? Like versus, hey, I'm going to do all this stuff in the weight room and we're going to get it maxed out. But well, or you could just go push a bobsled for a few
Yeah.
years and just get
Yeah.
yoked out like that. It's so. I mean, yes, yeah. Go ahead. I had another thought, but I don't want to keep rambling on.
Yeah, because it was obviously super competitive as well. Like
Yeah.
my place in the team depended at that point because I was proving myself on pushing week in, week out. And because I was underweight, this is another thing about the sport. There's a maximum weight of sled and athletes.
Yeah.
And you want to be close to that maximum weight because it's a momentum, it's a gravity sport. So what I lacked in body mass was put back into the sled in ballast. So we'd actually put like lead weights in the sled. So I was also pushing like over the weight of what other people were pushing. So I was overloaded in that. It was a very heavy sled, so that changes things as well. And yeah, it was just competitive overload, kind of 3, 4, 5 times a week. And also it allowed a little bit more frequency because the volume was low. You'd only have 2 to 3 like training pushes a day if you're on the actual ice track in the winter. So the frequency increased and the volume decreased in those acceleration based activities. And yeah, my specific hypertrophy in the hamstring posterior chain and my performance in any speed or power strength test was vastly improved after that first season.
Yeah, I think for a period of time I became a little bit of I don't know if you call it like a biomechanical purist. As soon as you're on a sled, you just can't rotate as much, and you can't coil the head side to rib side to side and all that. And yeah, of course not. But like I think what I've definitely come to realize what each tool gives you. And it's like, look, just because you can't do a thing doesn't mean you're like when you actually lock in, now everything else is going to have to work way harder. And I've become a really big fan of, and I want to get on a bobsled now because, I wish I could get some sort of like, some setup, but the closest thing, and I'll just say this, sorry, my mind just jumped, but I wanted to say it because I think it's really valuable, especially for narrow ISA types, is it's almost like having your hands in front of you on something. DJ Murakami said he goes by Strong Camps. He's been on this podcast a few times, said he ran an experiment where he only did Hatfield squats for like a year. And I think DJ's a wide, but nevertheless, a wide ISA ribcage.
Yeah.
But he said when he had his hands in front of him for every squat for a year, I mean, his legs were the thing that adapted. And that makes sense, right? You're not leaning forward as much or whatever.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
So it's like having your hands on a sled. It changes your position in relation to what you're doing as well, so the hamstrings can gain leverage.
I think there's a safety thing there as well. We've talked about feeling safe, and I think that does improve your output. Like we have so many breaks on us as humans, and I think having some sort of a crutch, for want of a better word, and I mean I've seen this certainly in rehabilitation from hamstrings. Had a few minor tears of the hamstrings during my career, and coming back to using we have trolleys that we use on an indoor track. So it's essentially like a bobsled on wheels, and it'll weigh anything between, you add weights to it, so anything between 30 and kind of 100 kilos. But it's on wheels, so it's like a shopping trolley, shopping cart, I think you guys would call it. And your ability to get back to return to run work in using that was so much quicker. It's a great piece of equipment for return to run stuff coming off injury. And, because we leave them in the training hall, you start to see other athletes kind of having a go on them, track athletes having a go. Even one of the professional soccer players that I was coaching just saw us training and he was like, I want to have a go. I want to see how it feels. So we let him have a go on it. I think it's a good piece of training equipment. I think the closest you can get commercially is that tank sled. It's like the power on wheels, and you can change the resistance. So if you knock the resistance off entirely, so it can get going, because that's one of the things, it gets going much quicker than people think. So the initial impact on the sled, you're going to feel that weight. But once you've cleared 2 or 3 strides and got some momentum into the sled itself, it starts moving pretty quickly. And so you have to then organize yourself with that crutch that you're holding on to. And it's a very, very interesting exercise. So yeah, I'd encourage you, if you're ever anywhere where you find one of those tank sleds, like take the resistance off and like see what kind of speed you can get up to within that, in that gym space.
Yeah. Yeah, the best hamstring training really does happen at high velocity. Like that's what they're meant to do. And so
Yeah.
I
And I
think
do find that it's people, and obviously this goes back to the old Charlie Francis work of obviously the sprinting is the biggest stimulus upon the hamstrings. But then you've got this idea of, well, people want to bulletproof the hamstrings, right? So we do a load of eccentric work on top of that. There's only so much we can put into that tissue, especially with it being, a higher proportion fast twitch. It's much more sensitive to volume. And so, yeah, I just think if you've got the velocity component in there, you've got to be very careful with the strength component that you're putting into the program on top of that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It is. And I think that's just the thing. Once you learn to recruit your hamstrings well in your core activities, you do rethink how you are implementing those things on top of it. And
Yeah.
yeah, I do think that's where the Nordic thing, and I've talked with people about this. I like if you can set up your Nordics well, like band assisted, good positions. You're not like arching the crap out of your back or, you know, giving people stuff they're not ready for. I think they can be good. And I've used them well, and I like putting them in. But if you do, if you're less sprinting all the time and you do 5 sets of 5 Nordics and just face plan each one, like I could see that being a pretty poor prescription. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I really like them as not necessarily Nordic, but in a glute-ham machine.
Yeah,
I like them as a teaching piece to allow people to control their pelvis and lumbar, because you see people just hike into extension in the back. If you're teaching to people to be really, really strict, and also in a glute ham machine, if you can press your feet, especially barefoot, against the plate at the back, and you're concentrating on trying to activate that arch in your feet. So I think maybe you've called it taco feet before.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're really trying to concentrate, and so you get that interplay from the feet through the soleus into that. So you've got that hamstring gastroc interplay across the knee. And then that then goes into the pelvis in the concentric and the lumbar, because you're trying to control that lumbar and pelvis position. So you don't just hike into dump into extension. Like, I think that becomes a really good teaching piece. So at the same time, you're getting that eccentric overload in the hamstring, but usually with a Nordic, because it's kind of so savage, people are just going to compensate into those extension patterns anyway. Whereas if you get them into a glute ham raise, or at least the pad is kind of partially up the thigh,
Mm,
can
yeah.
really feel that pelvis position under duress, which is a great way to, I think, teach people where they are in space, because a lot of people just don't understand the tension that they need
Oh, yeah.
within that pelvis and lumbar to get it neutral when it needs to be neutral in a sprint.
Yeah. Um, Pat Davidson's idea on having things have more air or more ground, like the ultimate would be like more air is like a pogo hop and ground is like a pendulum machine squat where you are seated in. But Pat would talk about how when he does the pendulum squat, his legs will evenly grow in mass versus a back squat that's less grounded. And if you think about the hamstring, like you just said there, it's like doing those variations on the DHR, it's more ground. It's often more feedback. Why wouldn't you do it that way? Whereas a straight Nordic, just someone's holding your ankles and go
Yeah.
for it is a lot of air. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
not to say there's not people who are strong enough to do that, but if we have all these tools available in the same way that you can regress a squat or a split squat or a press, makes sense to use it. So yeah, that glute-ham, man, that's the piece I've been trying to get. I have most things I want in my home gym, but the glute-ham, it takes up a lot of space, man. But I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know what I'm going to put that in my garage, but that's been the piece I've been thinking about. I probably have to go in the basement.
Have you seen the ground-based ones where it's a glute ham, but you just don't have the ability to do the hyperextension, so it just sits on the
Mm-mm.
floor?
Yeah, I might have to get one
You-
of those. I have seen
Yeah,
those.
you get the half dome pad on it, and then it can just sit in a corner. That's the one I used quite a lot. And obviously, you don't get you don't get the hip flexion part of it if you want to do the full like yesis glute ham raise. So you get the hyperextension
Oh
and
yeah.
then the knee flexion at the top. But you can get the knee flexion piece, the Nordic piece in there, and it's a lot more gentle on, especially pes and Sarine. I do find that people have got to be very careful with Nordics if they've got any
Yeah.
pes issues and any lower hamstring, medial hamstring pathology.
Yeah, Answering. Man, I haven't heard that. That's been 20 years since college,
We
right?
we we deal with that a lot in my sport, believe me, because we're really raking that foot through in that acceleration pattern with weight in front of us, and yeah, that pairs really gets overloaded.
That's that's like I'm trying to think of what's you got the popliteus that's like right in the back of the knee basically, and that's if you just
Yeah,
go up into the inside a little bit, that's your Answering area.
yeah. The pes comes round, so you've got the three tendons coming round to the tibia there on the inside, and so it can actually manifest in almost like anterior knee pain, but really your tendons are just tugging on those anchor points.
Mm.
Um, Complicated area, and obviously I've through that years of overload, I lost one of those, so I lost semi 10 that completely ruptured. Um,
Oh man.
yeah, after and then in retrospective scans that I had afterwards, there's already adaptations going on in the other tendons to try and offload that the one that was degrading. So yeah, that's an area that I've had a lot of issues with. So I probably also don't like the Nordic massively just because it caused me a lot of pain.
Yeah.
But you just move that pad up the thigh slightly, and believe me, I could rep Nordics, for man points, I could rep Nordics, chest to the
Mm.
floor, but then I wouldn't be able to sprint for a few days afterwards because my
Uh,
tendons would be screaming.
yeah. Yeah, and you're probably strong enough. Like I don't know, I think I got so much out of my calves and back, and I don't know that it wouldn't. I could still sprint because I'm like, well, all those little muscles just kind of took it over. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting piece of it all. So just to kind of round things out here, I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of more like the raw strength versus moving better and being more you could call it
Mhm,
functional as an older, you have
mhm.
38-year-old asked to for high power outputs. The last thing I wanted to mention too before I ask you about this, just because you got me thinking about this with the bobsled, is in addition to being much more sled friendly, I love sleds now, and it's like it is that I prefer to hit my legs with a sled, like as almost a primary piece in some respects. I think about the Louis Simmons and the West Side GPP stuff and all the heavy sled work
Mm.
they did, and like the stories of the Finnish lumberjacks who were like powerlifters dragging stuff backwards. And so, but another thing that I think is somewhat similar, probably not entirely, but like one of the odd ways that I've gotten my hamstrings a lot more as kind of someone who will preferentially recruit glutes and spinal erectors for a lot of things is in the winter, I do a lot of sandbag conditioning on the hill in front of my house. And I found when I have people to train with, we usually do a series where it's like we go down and walk up once, and then like we go down and walk backwards up once, and then the third one we race with the sandbag, and typically it's well, there's no transfer, and yeah, it's biomechanically there's not a lot of transfer, but dude, I will feel that in my hamstrings way more than pretty much even sprinting and acceleration. I feel
Mm.
that, and I think it's something with the front load, like the
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
the Zurcher piece, because I want to use that as an inroad because I want to talk with you about some of those functional elements. I saw you had posted recently doing an ISO Zurcher split squat. I was like, oh, that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
So segue to, okay, power, typical bobsled power, squat, bench, deadlift, power cleans, all these explosive activities. How has that shaken out with your longevity and being able to produce high power outputs later and working through injuries and issues?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. It's a big question. So, I mean, straight off the bat, so the preparation over the last 12 months, I've done no compound lifting whatsoever. And I would have done, but it's just the knock-on effect from me was too much. So it's a lot on the system on top of all of the power work that I'll be doing for the sport on a 38-year-old frame. And so I was kind of forced to leave that out. And with conversations with a few people, including yourself, we found other means to try and get load into the system. And it hasn't manifested in reductions in power output, as far as I can tell. Who knows? Maybe if I had done it, the power output would be higher. But the fact of the matter is, I'm still hitting near PRs in overhead throws, counter movement jumps, etc. at 38 years old. So that tells me that then I'm not missing those exercises right now. Maybe on the injury front, just taking tissues through range under load. Maybe I'm missing that, but we have been doing other means to try and get that same type of load into the system. Yielding isometrics in deep positions, stuff like that. You mentioned the Zurcher split squat. I think earlier on, I think in developmental stages, it's definitely those compound lifts and max strength methods are the easiest way to make gains in strength and output. And I think that they're needed within the developmental stages of people's careers. But I just wonder, once that money is in the bank, how far you need to pursue them. So it's like once that money's in there, really, for me now, I feel like I'm living off the interest of what I deposited in my developmental stages.
Yeah.
But the issue is, I think I pushed it too far at points. So almost across the board now, I rarely give people max strength compound work who are in speed sports more than 1 to 2 times a week now. But they still have like 3-4 gym sessions, but I'm just giving them some more metabolic sessions that are probably more around unilateral work and what you might call functional work.
Yeah.
Just because I find the knock-on effect, unless you have a lot of, so this has been a thing that I've seen as well. If you have a lot of hands-on therapy, you can get away with doing way more compound max strength work, because any of the things, the knock-ons we see from a postural perspective can be unraveled with a very good therapist. But if you haven't got that luxury, which most people don't, even most people with, the therapist has got to be very good to unravel that as well. I think you can get into issues with your posture, etc. And I mean, the proof's in the pudding I know that you've done a lot of like side lying, sandbag weighted work across the pelvis, and the improvements that you then get in internal rotation after that. And I think that plays into this piece as well, that if we're constantly under a very, if there's too much volume of that work and not enough volume of the other work around it, that's when we get into trouble. So I do think it's a balancing act. So that's not to say I'm absolutely not anti. I still think it's the best way to go about making strength gains and improvements in pure output from a force perspective. But I just think it's got to be very balanced within the program itself. That can be a therapeutic piece, or it can be a piece around keeping movement options open. Like we talked a lot about the circuits that people like Dan and Boo use. I think a lot of that is keeping those movement options open to people and making sure they don't get just straight down into the postures that you see powerlifters walking around with.
Yes.
And I think you've got to go a long way down that path to get to that point, especially if you're doing all of your max speed work, sports around the actual strength work you're doing. But I think when you get into 4, 5, 6 years, 3 times a week, compound lifts, that's when that can start to change.
Yeah. I think it is interesting what you said about the therapist. If you don't have a therapist, which most of us don't have that regular therapy, your therapist becomes things like the sideline sandbag to squish, to give restoring or expansion anterior to posterior. And it, honestly, even doing a lot of that stuff and stuff that's come out of Bill Hartman's train of thought and Postural Restoration Institute, but I think about it a lot just in terms of expansion, just re-expansion. If you're constantly doing a back squat or deadlift, it's just you're getting a lot of compression, and what are ways to re-expand that? And I think as well about, like you said, like how much weight do you have to, how often you have to do it to really squish yourself? How much you like someone who's squatting 60 kilos probably isn't going to compress themselves too hard, even if they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
They might get hurt. I don't know, but they're not going to versus 400 kilos.
That's a really good point, actually, because it does, like, in the first few years of that process, you're not overloading yourself enough to run into any issues.
Mm-hmm.
But then, especially with very strong athletes, when they start getting into that realm where it's going to be really impactful on them, I think that's when things have got to be balanced out. But there are many other means. I think one thing that's not talked about enough is pool work as well. I've always found huge benefits with getting in the pool. And it's really weird because I think it's also that hydrostatic pressure for some reason offloads you slightly, makes you a little bit more buoyant, allows you to get back into some of those expansive areas. And I've found, as far as a recovery modality, so I used it a lot during, again, it was something that was forced upon me. And then I just found that I got good benefits from it. And so then that now features as a regeneration piece for me a lot. Getting in the pool does a lot of good, and it unravels a lot of those issues as well. So then if you marry that up with a therapist, pool, etc., maybe you can get away with doing way more of that traditional work. If you don't have all of those pieces, then yeah, there needs to be way more movement variation in there. And I think that's why you do see a lot of those, what general strength circuits, for want of a better word, and for everybody listening, that's not what you're probably thinking. It's more unilateral work, it's core work, it's metabolic in nature, it's calisthenic based. These are the things that a lot of traditional track and field programs still have in at high volume. And I think they do some of the work for you as well in keeping a lot of those movement options open to you away from the compound lifts.
Yeah. Even the metabolic is expansive as well. Like you mentioned that, like blood flow is expansive. So it's just like what expands those items. So in terms of lifts themselves, you mentioned, Ben, not doing traditional bilateral work. I do think it is really interesting to mention that, like putting things in the bank, because sometimes we do get short-sighted. And even I'll look back at old programs I wrote and be like, oh yeah, I was doing that. That was cool. And I try to avoid the biases of getting overly into like I really, really like the strength and adaptations that come out of the work that like Bill's doing. And so I sometimes forget that, hey, if you're in your early 20s and this is part of your strength power profile, how much like traditional squat clean work do you need? And then when are you good? And then how do you maintain it? Those are important questions. I was even thinking about, someone had mentioned this, and I don't think it was in direct reference to like easy strength, like Dan John's Easy Strength and Pavel book that changed that. Everyone should read that book. It's so good. But a lot of it, like 2 sets of 5 once a day and that kind of thing. I wonder if that's like, if you already had a base where you were a meathead earlier and you built it, like, yeah, that'll maintain. I mean, I've used that and maintained like so good with just insanely low volume. And so all that, and I'd be curious to ask Dan. In fact, next time I have him on the podcast, I'd love to ask his opinion and thought of it. And maybe I need to go back and read the book, and there's something there about a precursor with it all. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that tipping point? Like, and maybe population, like the team sport athletes you work with. What are some sliders with like their back squats, or if you're going to give them a split squat or a split squat Zurcher? How are you managing that with those athletes? Or what's your thoughts on how much power they need?
Well, I think this is still you still go through the process of the max strength element. I think as I talked about it before, like money in the bank, I don't think it's a coincidence that you see very different approaches. For example, like the Bondarchuk approach. I've heard it said that that's worked very well with a lot of athletes who have already eked out what they can from the max strength development standpoint. So I think I'm certain that I wouldn't be able to jump as high as I do or perform as I do if I hadn't done all of those reps of heavy squats through my early 20s. Like, I think I had to go through that process originally. But I think, once that is deposited, what you need to do to maintain that is very minimal.
Yeah.
Very minimal. Like, undoubtedly, I'm sure I could get underneath like a Hatfield squat now and still lift a lot of weight without having, or an Anderson squat, like a 90-degree knee angle, without having any of that volume in my legs. That's still been deposited, still in the bank. As far as team sport athletes, I do find that for the most part, they really haven't got the most out of their max strength development yet anyway, because, we're very specialized in sports like track and field or bobsleigh. You can go through that developmental process and hit a very high volume of strength work unimpeded, whereas you just can't do that in a game like soccer.
Yeah. Yes.
Rugby is slightly different because they put a massive emphasis on that. But even if you actually look at the loads that rugby players for their size and strength is shifting, especially in season, it's not huge because it would be ridiculous. You're just going to bang yourself up to the game on the weekend. So a lot of what I find with team sport athletes is you can get a lot from traditional strength work because they haven't got the most out of that modality yet anyway. Some of them won't get the most out of that modality through their whole career. You can still give them that. A trap bar deadlift is a beautiful lift for a footballer, and because they can't get the same sort of volume in as well, because it would be ridiculous if you're giving them 5 5s on a full back squat when they've got 5 training sessions that week on pitch. They might have a game, they might have 2 games, and the off season is so short anyway. You don't have any time to go through that. You can't do a traditional block periodization. So with team athletes, I do find that you can keep heavy compound lifts in, certainly at a lower volume, much further through a career, and they're going to yield massive benefits. I think the issue is with, like, in track and field and bobsleigh, for example, is those things have been overdone in the developmental stages, and so they can start to cause problems. But if they haven't been in the same at the same sort of volume, like, for example, somebody like Kim Collins, like, the idea, I've heard that he didn't lift in his early career, and then the guy, I was just watching it the other day, I think he ran his PR at 40, or at least
40,
ran
39 or 40. It was crazy.
Absolutely crazy. And it's like, from what I've heard, that traditional strength piece came in later in his career.
Yep.
So it's like he still had that in his pocket to use and augment his performance. So I think it serves a purpose in developmental stages, and if you haven't eked everything out of that, you can continue using it. If you have got everything out of it that you can, then you need to get more imaginative about the means at which you maintain that output.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that point with the team sport athletes, because team sport athlete that is never getting that much time to build strength, and that idea too of how much you have to lift before you're really compressing yourself hard. Like a team sport athlete, like a soccer player who squats like 200 for a few reps, are they going to compress them? As long as it's done with good, slant board, elevate their heels, they're moving into space well, they're not just doing a good morning squat or some type thing. Are they really going to get to the point where they're seeing those compressive knock-ons or whatever? It's first, track and bobsled, all the individual sports, you hit it real quick. I've seen it. And you start to see it really, like, and it's funny retrospectively working with high-level swimmers, Olympic swimmers. It's like, I subconsciously, I think I knew that point, but I know it better now, having understood more of like Bill Hartman and PRI and all that tree of effects. I'm like, oh yeah, that was definitely happening there at that swimmer's career in the weight room, and we could have been to alternative methods. And I brought it up even at times, like, hey, maybe we should only be lifting 2 times a week for 20 minutes, and I think we could do that. And it just never really went down there. But
it's extreme, isn't it? We're talking about very extreme examples, because I think, like, when you think about doing, let's take a traditional like session, like 3 to 5 times 5 back squat 3 times a week on top of all the other work that you're doing. I mean, from me, let's talk about me specifically. All the compression that I've been under during my career. So sliding in bobsleighs, 4 or 5 days a week, lifting heavy loads 3-4 days a week, sprinting on top of that. That's very, very extreme. It's an extreme amount of compression. It's the same with the swimmers you're talking about, the type of the volumes that people are under. And I think that's something that's changed in my approach over the years as well. I think we chase a lot of volume, which a lot of it comes from Eastern Bloc, old Soviet work. And it's just, it's a hell of a lot of volume to put on the system. And this is very, very different from a lot of other sports, team sports, for example, especially people who are recreational and not pro, collegiate or Olympic athletes. It's very, very different. So I think we've seen these examples more and more in the sports we work with, which are very extreme, really, thinking about it. And so that our perspective is very different from other people's that wouldn't have seen so much of an extreme adaptation to a stimulus, because the stimulus has been so big.
Yeah. It's, I think as individual sport athletes too, it's nice. We all carry experience, and hopefully we got to play the team sport, like rugby for you, basketball for me early, and you have that experience. So it's like you experience something that's varied, where it's just your volume on the court or the field is so high. You experience individual taking something too far, and you can kind of start to weld it all together in how you see what the athlete in front of you needs. I just want to close this out then just quickly with, we've had these conversations throughout the past year and your own training, your power outputs. And I wanted to ask you, like, some of your favorite, if you're not doing bilateral lifts now, you have put the money in the bank. like I mentioned, I saw you doing that Zurcher split squat ISO, and like, what are some of your go-tos for maintaining strength now versus what it would have been when you were 25 or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of doing everything around the traditional max strength piece, but not the max strength piece. So metabolic work, hypertrophy work, surprisingly,
Yeah.
high rep work has served me well. Yielding isometric work in deeper ranges, as you talked about with that split squat Zurcher. And power work. So, medicine ball throws, counter movement jumps, and yeah, all those pieces seem to have kept the max strength piece pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then
So it's just
that split
basic.
squat Zurcher was a nice one. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of my favorites, man. Like I mentioned the hamstring. Like I more recently, I just remember the first time I set up a split squat Zurcher with front foot elevated on a plate. So it was, I either had a slant board or I elevated the slant board like 4 inches. And I was like, man, I feel that my hamstrings just working in this, like just, and that more than I could in RDL or anything. And I'm like, you know what? If I could do one lift right now, it's 41, 42. This would
Yeah.
probably be it. But going back in time when I was 21, I think I needed to do some heavy, like 2/3 of the way down squats was my jam, like back squats and stuff like that. And 3 sets of 12 deep in the early season, like the hypertrophy, like kind of maintaining that muscle just so it's enough to compress. It's like you have it, and it's there to provide the pressure where you need it. But then, letting the specific take care of it because you have it, and I think there's definitely something there with that.
Well, yeah, we've got to go through those adaptations, right? And that's probably 10 years of adaptation we're talking about when first getting into strength work and then getting to a point where that overload in your max strength is high enough to really, really affect you and really change some of the stuff that's going on at the tissue level. And we've got to go through all of those adaptations first. So we're at the other side now, and we've made all those adaptations that were needed. So it's kind of easy for us to look back and think, well, what would we have done differently? But who's to say if we'd have done it differently, we wouldn't have come out with the same adaptations that we've got now.
Yeah. I think about that a lot. Like sometimes I think, what would I change? My best years at track, like, would I change anything, or what would I have maybe done a little differently? And I look at some of the dumb stuff, like what I would say is dumb, but maybe wasn't, and I don't know. It's always interesting to look back on those times. And yeah.
I think I would say for me, I think the main thing for me, it was, and again, who knows, because I might not have made the adaptations needed, but the volume, I do think the volume and chasing volume was foolish. And I think more so actually in plyometrics than lifts. I think with most of the overuse injuries that I saw and I got myself, and there was a few career enders really for some of the people that I was in university with in the triple jump group, came from a very, very high volume of proper pure plyometrics. So we're talking bounds, hops, etc., drop jumps. We're not talking extensive. We're not talking multi-jump. Pure plyometrics, very, very, very high volumes there, which usually come from a lot of the readings that people did around the Soviet systems. I saw that volume as something that I think I overdid for sure. Yeah, I think from an orthopedic standpoint, I've suffered probably more from that than from some of the other stuff that I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with the max strength stuff, I think as well, especially if you're set up a certain way, if you're set up to be explosive, you just really don't need a very high volume of max strength stuff to get the great benefits from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like five sets. I don't know if you need 5 sets when you're a sprinter.
Yeah. It's like one drop of something and, you're making a cake. It's like the drop of food dye or something. That's the kind of visual I have in my head. It's like it's not a lot. But I agree with you on the plyo stuff too. I think it's like, it's interesting to look at like those people who are just meant to do plyos, like Stefan Holm, when he was on this podcast talking about some workout he did was like 24 by 60 meters pounding.
Yeah.
Like if you're built for it and you weigh 155 pounds or 70 kilos and, or some Christo Markov, a Bulgarian triple jumper, and he did like however many single leg, like 39 inch or about 90 centimeter hurdle hops in a row. But sometimes I feel like those are like urban legends almost. People say to like, be like, oh, this guy did this. And,
I know
that.
that I know that when I was in university, the triple jump group that I was working with, just one of the player sessions with a weighted vest was over 300 contacts
Yeah,
unilateral.
that's a lot. That's a lot.
And the tempo session, you won't believe this, the tempo session on Mondo in spikes, 20 times 200.
Oh, yeah, that'll get you. The
Yeah,
cumulative of that, the cumulative is just crazy.
it really is. And that was, I didn't do most of that training, but this is a training group of overzealous 19, 20, 21 year olds.
Yeah.
And, it is actually amazing thinking back, like how many people survived that
Yep.
and did really well. There were some great junior jumpers within that group. But I'm looking at it now thinking, I don't know how we handled any of that volume. And unfortunately, a lot of people dropped off along the way. Yeah. In fact, I don't know anyone that made it really beyond early 20s, which is a real shame because there was some big talents there.
Yeah, it is something where it's like you don't want to be the doomsayer type person with, oh, you're this is going to use it up or something like that. Because I mean, there's always the person who can kind of figure out how to manage that, and you want to be optimistic. But I also just find I find it fun to work, like especially now, like when I was in college, I would do the hurdle hops over the 39-inch or the high single leg hurdles, and I would try to max that out. And that was an important part of my training, honestly. It was really helpful. But I would never did more than, and this was self-directed too, which is interesting. My coach let me basically do an extra plyo day in the week. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go do hurdle hops. And I probably did, I don't know, 8 sets of 4 total, either double or single legs. So like, 35, do a little sprint off at the end sometimes, like 35 contacts or whatever. And it would have felt weird to do more, honestly. I don't know. Like, so to be crammed.
I think it's always very hard for the coach as well, though, because they're trying to, if you take the lens right out on a career, you don't know whether those kids are going to compete past university level. And you certainly don't know whether they're going to be like trying to come back at 38 years old. Yeah. And also those kids are going to be eager because they want to, because for a lot of them, it's make or break early. Like if they don't show that potential early on, then it's done for them anyway. If they don't show potential early on, get onto a pathway with UK athletics, get onto funding, make championships, then it's over past college anyway. So the coach and them, they're going to be thinking, well, how do I maximize this now? Because I need to be my best now, otherwise it's all over. So it's pretty easy to look back for me now in retrospect, competing well into my 30s. But at that time, that was nobody's mindset. That time was, it's now or never. I was in university leading up to London 2012, and that's what everybody was trying to compete for, home Olympics. So you can see why they were trying to do so much, because after that landmark, it was all over for them. Maybe they'd carry on if they made it, who knows? But yeah, that just changes your perspective on how they were being periodized, because you're not looking at a full career.
Yeah.
You're looking at the here and now.
One of the things I've really enjoyed with, honestly, you could say older athletes, but even younger athletes, like I would, if my kids are at the point where they ever want to have me run them through what I would call training and not just a game, which is all, I just try to keep the game thing going. Like Cal Dietz, mentioned the Frisbee as long as I can, but I really like those really low cone hurdles, the Marinovich and Sports Science Lab. And if people watch Power Plus Instagram, they're just like 4, 6, 8 inches off, and everything's a lot more fast than it is high. And I really like that stuff now. Like for me, single leg hurdle hop type stuff. Like if I do a lot of single leg hopping, my Achilles, I like it. It's a weapon for me, but it's like, I don't know how much I can truly do necessarily. But if I do a lot of low stuff, I feel better. Honestly, I'll probably jump higher the next day. And I do see a lot of people doing like single leg hops that probably aren't, that's not the optimal movement for them based on variety of factors. And I just like the low fast stuff as a base. And
it becomes very reflexive when you're doing it in that manner. Yeah. And, I think what the biggest gains that we get early on from learning to lift is to extend, basically. We're applying force on the ground through triple extension. So everybody's jumps improve because they can use the ground more, right? but then that's just less reflexive than what we'd be doing very naturally over shorter objects and what we'd do at top end speed. Obviously, it's going to improve your acceleration, especially the first few strides. The best athletes get the gains from the maximum strength, and then they just don't fall into that overextension or overuse of the ground trap that other people might do, because they are still so talented they can fall into what feels natural and self-organized despite all of the work that they're doing elsewhere to improve block clearance, for example.
Yeah, they always have the timing. Like, they have the structure and they have really good timing and probably pretty good tendons too. And they can just keep rolling with it. So, well, hey, Ben, this has been a great conversation. I think I have a bunch of stuff on my list, but some other time. Really appreciate our talk today. I know a lot of people are familiar with your social media, but where can people go to find more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, so I'm at Ben the Bounce, one word, across social media. Most of what I put out there is on Instagram, so everybody can keep up with what I'm doing there. I try and put out quality content and stuff that everybody can learn and gain from. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for being on the show today. It was great talking to you, Ben.
Well, it's a real honor. I've been listening to the show for many years, so thank you very much for having me on, and I hope to do it again sometime.